Abner Kneeland was born on the 7th of April 1774. In the small New England town of Gardner, Massachusetts. He was the sixth of 10 children. Raised in a working family. Inside a culture where Christianity surrounded everyday life. Church shaped morals. The Bible shaped law. Preachers shaped public opinion. To be respectable was to be religious. To doubt openly was dangerous. Kneeland did not begin life as a rebel. He began as a serious, practical young man. He worked as a carpenter. He taught school. He compiled spelling books. He had little formal schooling. But he had a sharp mind. And a strong desire to understand the world. In his 20s he joined a Baptist church in Putney, Vermont. By 1801 he was preaching as a lay minister. He was inside the religious system, not outside it. He prayed. He preached. He tried to live as a faithful Christian. Then he met a different current inside Christianity. The Universalists. Through the writings of Elhanan Winchester. And the influence of Hosea Ballou. He discovered a theology that rejected eternal hell. Universalism taught that a loving God would not torture people forever, and that all souls would finally be saved. For many Orthodox believers this was a dangerous idea. For Kneeland it felt more just, more humane, and more consistent with a God of love. He converted to Universalism. In 1804 he received a license to preach as a Universalist. In 1805 he was ordained as a Universalist minister in Langdon, New Hampshire. Over the next years he served congregations in New Hampshire, Vermont, Pennsylvania, New York, and Massachusetts. He was not a passive minister. He helped compile a Universalist hymn book. He wrote many hymns himself. He edited Universalist periodicals. He debated other preachers. He produced his own translation of the New Testament, trying to bring the text closer to what he believed was its original meaning. He gave his life to religion. And because he took religion seriously, he could not ignore its problems. As he studied the Bible more deeply, questions began to grow inside him. He struggled with the idea of eternal punishment. He struggled with the claim that the Bible was perfect and infallible. He struggled with doctrines that seemed to reflect human culture and politics. More than timeless justice, Kneeland did something that many preachers never do. He turned his doubts into a disciplined investigation. He taught himself Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, so he could read scripture in its original languages. He compared translations. He examined how key words were rendered differently from one version to another. He noticed where translators softened harsh ideas, or sharpened them, or tried to hide contradictions. The more he studied, the more the Bible began to look to him like a human document. Written by people, edited by people, argued over by people, and then wrapped in the claim of divine authority. He did not reach this conclusion lightly. He entered into a written debate with his friend Hosea Ballou about revelation and the authority of Scripture. Their letters, later published, show a man who is wrestling honestly with his faith. In that correspondence, Kneeland admitted that he could no longer see the Scriptures as a direct message from heaven. He saw them as records of human attempts to understand the divine. Shaped by time, fear, hope, and limitation, for a while Ballou tried to pull him back toward traditional belief. Kneeland returned to the pulpit. But the tension did not disappear. It grew deeper. As he moved from one congregation to another, his theology kept changing. He rejected punishment after death. He questioned the divinity of Jesus. He questioned the existence of a single personal intervening God. Some congregations admired his honesty. Others were disturbed. Conflicts grew. Divisions widened. By the late 1820s, the distance between Abner Kneeland and traditional Christianity had become too great. The Universalist Church expelled him from fellowship. He was no longer a minister of the Christian gospel. He had crossed a line. Kneeland did not call himself an atheist. He called himself a pantheist. For him, God was not a person outside the universe watching and judging. God was another name for the universe itself. For nature, for existence, for the totality of all that is. He rejected the idea of a supernatural ruler. He embraced the idea that the laws of nature are all we have, and all we need. In his writings, he said that the Christian God of his former colleagues was nothing more than a creation of their imagination. He refused to pretend that he still believed in a God. His mind could no longer accept. His break with Christianity was not only about theology, it was also about power. Kneeland believed that religious authority was being used to control people, to keep them obedient, to keep them ignorant, to keep them afraid. He saw how appeals to the will of God were used to justify inequality, to silence dissent, and to block reform. So he stepped into a new role, a public advocate of free thought. In Boston, he gathered around him a circle of free inquirers, men and women who believed that no idea, no doctrine, no scripture should be beyond question. They organized lectures. They invited radical speakers. They created a space where people could say in public what they had only dared to think in private. In 1831, Kneeland founded a newspaper, the Boston Investigator. It became one of the earliest and most influential free thought papers. In the United States, its pages carried criticism of religious dogma, defenses of free speech, and arguments for social reform. Through the Investigator, Kneeland attacked blind belief. He challenged the power of clergy who claimed to speak for God. He argued that religion should not control education, law, or public policy. He insisted that truth must be tested by reason and evidence, not accepted only because it is old, or sacred, or popular. For Kneeland, religion did not survive because it was true. It survived because people were trained to be afraid of questioning it. Afraid of hell, afraid of divine anger, afraid of losing their community and family. He wanted to break that fear. He stood on public stages and said that the universe is governed by natural laws, not by miracles. He said that human beings are responsible for their own ethics. He said that no priest, no church, no book has the right to chain the human mind. His opponents were furious. Clergy denounced him from their pulpits. Newspapers attacked him as a corrupter of morals. Politicians warned that his ideas would destroy the foundations of society. But his ethics were not shallow. He did not throw away morality when he left Christianity. He rebuilt it on a different foundation. Kneeland believed that morality comes from human empathy, from our ability to feel the suffering of others, and from our responsibility to reduce that suffering. He believed that justice is a human project, not a divine gift. He believed that if we want a better world, we must build it ourselves. This belief led him into struggles that were far ahead of his time. He supported the rights of women when women had almost no legal or political power. He argued that women should have more control over their own lives, their property, and their choices. He supported birth control at a time when even mentioning it was considered indecent. He supported racial equality in a country still marked by slavery and deep prejudice. He defended the right of people of different races to marry when such unions were widely condemned. For him, free thought and social equality were two sides of the same struggle. You cannot free the mind while leaving unjust power structures untouched, and you cannot build a just society while keeping minds in chains. His enemies did not only argue with him, they tried to silence him. In 1833, he printed a letter in the Boston Investigator, in which he wrote that the God of the Universalists was nothing more than a creation of their imagination. Under an old Massachusetts blasphemy law, this became the basis for a criminal charge. The law, a relic from colonial times, made it a crime to publicly deny or insult the Christian God. Kneeland's case dragged on for years. Finally, in 1838, he was brought to a final trial. The courtroom became a stage for a deeper conflict. Should the state protect religious doctrine, or should it protect freedom of thought? Kneeland did not apologize. He did not claim that his words had been misunderstood. He did not pretend to be orthodox. He stood by his convictions. He argued that he had simply expressed his honest beliefs, and that in a free country, no one should be punished for that. He insisted that the blasphemy law was an enemy of liberty. The court disagreed. He was convicted of blasphemy and sentenced to 60 days in prison. With that sentence, Abner Kneeland became the last person in the United States to be jailed for blasphemy. A man was sent to prison, not for violence, not for theft, not for fraud, but for words, for saying publicly that he did not believe in the God the law was designed to protect. His body was locked in a cell. His mind was not. After serving his sentence, Kneeland did not return to the religious centers of New England. He turned his back on that world and moved west to the frontier lands of the Iowa Territory, near what is now Farmington, Iowa. He helped found a small experimental community called Salubria. Salubria was not built around a church. It was built around an idea that people could live together, guided by reason, mutual respect, and freedom of conscience. It was a utopian experiment. It did not grow large, and it did not last long after his death, but it was a living symbol of his belief that human beings can organize their lives without religious domination, without fear of hell, and without surrendering their minds. In Salubria, Kneeland continued to write and teach. He did not become rich. He did not become a national celebrity. He lived quietly, but consistently, according to his principles. On the 27th of August 1844, Abner Kneeland died in Salubria, at the age of 70. By then, the public storm around his name had faded. The nation that had once feared him had mostly forgotten him. He left behind no church bearing his name, no official Kneeland school of philosophy, no large institution to preserve his memory. What he left instead was a pattern. He showed what it looks like when a person follows evidence, even when it leads away from comfort. When a person refuses to pretend that they believe what they no longer find credible. When a person accepts the cost of honesty. He began as a believer. He became a minister. Through study and reflection, he walked out of the world that had given him his identity. He paid a price: loss of pulpits, loss of reputation, legal persecution, and imprisonment. But he gained something that he valued more: intellectual integrity. He showed that it is possible to move from faith to free thought, without losing morality, without losing compassion, without losing a sense of meaning. For him, meaning did not come from being watched by a divine judge. Meaning came from participating in the real world, from seeking truth, from reducing suffering, from expanding freedom. His life raises questions that are still alive today. If your beliefs are inherited, have you really chosen them? If your morality depends on fear of punishment, is it truly moral? If a society punishes people for speaking honestly about what they think is true, can it call itself free? Abner Kneeland's answer, written not only in his words, but in his choices, was clear. Belief should never be a prison. Authority should never be above question. No book, no institution, no tradition has the right to demand that you stop thinking. He believed that every human being has both the right and the responsibility to examine what they are told, to test it against reason and experience, and to accept only what survives that test. He believed that progress begins when someone dares to say, "I no longer believe this, and I will not pretend that I do." Today his name is not widely known, but in the history of freedom of thought, he stands at a crucial turning point. A minister who became a freethinker, a believer who became a critic, a citizen who went to jail rather than betray his own mind. His story is not only about the 19th century, it is a mirror held up to the present. Every time someone is told, "Do not ask that question," his story becomes relevant again. Every time someone is pressured to pretend to believe what they do not believe, his story becomes relevant again. Every time a law, a custom, or a social norm tries to put a fence around thought, his story becomes relevant again. The deepest message of Abner Kneeland's life can be spoken in simple words. Think for yourself. Face the consequences with courage. Never surrender your mind to any authority, no matter how sacred it claims to be.